Every so often, although probably more so with the near-death experience, natural release of DMT within our bodies, one might witness the enchanted DMT traveler blast off or break through, spin around, jump up and down, shake you back and forth, kiss you on the cheek, then shout out, "Oh my God, I saw God!" In DMT Ayahuasca Part 3, I Met God, the Cognitive Experience, I want to now touch upon this God experience. And before you go jumping at me because I'm talking about the ultimate taboo, God, hear me out, as my beliefs on God are quite abstract compared to most. And well, whether you like it or believe it or not, God and DMT go hand in hand. Firstly, I feel it important to re-emphasize both the incredible subjectivity and in that, the sheer magnitude of possible experiences that can be derived from DMT. Honestly, I'd be inclined to say it's infinite. Furthermore, if you remember, I've stated previously that I've personally done DMT hundreds of times, and that I have never had the same exact experience twice. Therefore, I've either experienced a whole lot of God, I've experienced a whole lot of God I don't yet interpret as being God, or perhaps I just haven't made such bold claims with words that paint such a vividly vague picture on so very elaborate, abstract, and out-of-this-world experiences, like those one might have while traveling the DMT verses, like one might imagine God to be. Remember, DMT is a fully interactive virtual reality roller coaster that one can choose to humble themselves to ride. But I feel we humans forget that life itself is too, in its fullest form, nothing less than a fully interactive virtual reality roller coaster ride. In this virtual reality roller coaster ride, our perception, the way we perceive and interpret events, but more importantly, the words or actions we choose to use with regards to painting a given picture, can often be quite uneducated, or educated uneducated, as I like to say, largely rooted in hearsay, careless, lazy, and generally highly misleading. This all assuming the storyteller is even trying to be as accurate as they can, and that their intentions are rooted in preserving the integrity of the myth we live, rather than in seekings of selfish attention, self-interest, and self-preservation, which sadly tends to be the norm. The fact is, with experiences that are unimaginably subjective, such as with DMT, and that are derived from one unimaginably subjective point of view, my two eyes, my two ears, is that we often get lost in translation when trying to both interpret and define what actually happened during any particular experience, assuming we can even put the experience into words in a manner that does it any sort of justice. This can be hard to do with anything, let alone with DMT. The simple truth remains, even if the images that one sees in their head were painstakingly clear, even if the storyteller is the most vivid literary genius in the world, the story is never going to be told right, nor will it paint the given picture perfectly. Not when it is limited to the prerogative of one point of view, at the mercy of something as pliant as perception, and rooted in a narrative with as frail a plaster as words. But what even is God? Better yet, what version of God is being referred to in the given scenario? If one said they saw God manifested into man, how do they know that that was the God, and they weren't really seeing someone or something entirely different? Did the God physically speak and proclaim themselves God, or was it a subliminal message? Or did the traveler simply see colors, shapes, and or animations that blew their minds beyond previous comprehension, and they are simply referring to God as this new metaphysical strange they've just encountered but can't define? Maybe the experience was just so inexplicable that those were the only words, "I saw God," that came to their mouth. Perhaps it was because they'd heard someone else say something similar after having a perceptibly similar experience. This tendency to parrot others is in fact very common in all we do in life, and happens both consciously and unconsciously. the subjective reality's ultimate dilemma, a lesson in the plasticity of perception. What I think I saw versus what I actually saw, versus what you think you saw versus what you actually saw, versus what someone else thinks they saw versus what they actually saw, and so forth, versus what an omniscient observer says happened. I've digressed. What one sees on DMT is important to note, particularly with such head-turning claims as having found God, whilst, as mentioned above, remaining consciously aware that we are hardly ever conscious of the difference between what we've actually interpreted and what our brain thinks we've interpreted when we choose to define, depict, and recreate things we've interacted with. In fact, more often than not, I would be inclined to believe that our brain doesn't even truly know what we've interacted with in any given moment, other than with whatever vague and fragile definition we may have tentatively applied to it. Did one see a bright, shiny light? Were there any humanoid figures, or were they alien? Was there unimaginable technology, or was it like an epic of Greek mythology with gods battling in the clouds? Was it like a cartoon, or was it real-life images? The lesson here is this: don't get so lost on the words of man as the myth we live, which is important to first grasp, because we do in fact live a myth every second of every day, is nothing less than a game of perception and how each individual player chooses to share their subjective perception with others, and whether they're good, honest, out of the box and or fair at portraying that perception, or malicious, superficial, in the box and or deceptive. In my opinion, with such scenarios, the odds are that one didn't actually see the God. One has most likely merely interpreted mind-boggling and physics-bending stimulus that they didn't know how to interpret or define, so they gave it the only abstract, albeit loose, definition they could think of: God. Regardless of who you are, DMT is going to be godly or spiritual in one way or another, simply by the nature of how complex the substance is and how it interacts with the human brain. So, as far as I'm concerned, one could go as far as to say that everyone who has ingested DMT has met God, or at least some aspect of it, in one way or another. Albeit quite the same, this could be said for anyone who has simply lived. Because if you are breathing, from my point of view, you are quite literally breathing God. If you are seeing, whatever you are seeing, person, place, or thing, it is quite literally God that you are seeing. Because at its roots, at its most simplistic assumption, God is everything. It is the all that is. Whether you want to break it down further into a single physical entity of existential manifestation, that is of course entirely up to you and your personal beliefs. Be it known, I don't presently believe experiencing God on DMT is so much about finding should there be one physical entity that is God. I wouldn't expect to find that precise physical entity when ingesting DMT. I believe that at least part of the God experience with DMT is about experiencing. And through these surreal and enchanting out-of-body experiences, one comes to think about things, like God, for example, and life in new and abstract ways, all after having one's mind turbocharged with never-before-held data regarding what is reality, and the revelation of how loose and pliable this thing called reality is when this new data clashes with our in-the-box, uninspired, and unenlightened understanding of it. The fact is, DMT is a powerful cognitive experience, like life, like God. In fact, what is anything we do and or perceive if not part of a powerful cognitive experience? What is God if not a powerful cognitive experience, and DMT the conduit to the connection? Everything that can be perceived has the potential to be enlightening because there is something to learn from everything, even when we don't see it. This is why, for example, tools such as DMT are so very important for our cognitive growth, because they open doors and pathways to thought and creativity that aren't there until you invite them to be there yourself. When one learns something is, at the bare minimum, possible, it changes the way they perceive and interact with it. Our imagination and creative store is only as limited as the stimulus we feed it or fail to feed it. It is the act of thinking and trying to figure out the equations we've been given, including the pieces that don't feel like parts of any specific puzzle, but oddly enough usually relate to a very particular puzzle in some abstract and unusual way, where one gleans their power within this cognitive experience we live, or surrenders it. I think it is apparent that most people who experiment with something like DMT are seeking something. But with regards to finding God, I believe this aspect of our conversation is more so a matter of deciphering how one subjectively defines God, thus, respectively, what God is to them. Regardless, like with most other otherworldly spiritual claims, a prospective traveler should be wary when hearing someone claim to have met God, because it was most likely merely an illusion of perception, someone hastily jumping to conclusions based off impartial or misunderstood data and who are merely parroting the words of others. It was derived from an understanding of God far different from our own, or there was a deceiver in one's midst intentionally muddying our myth with bullshit. Personally, I wouldn't currently go as far as to say that any one particular entity I've interacted with on DMT was the God. I don't believe this. I would be more inclined to say that God is the cognitive experience. DMT is the cheat code that allows one to tap into an exclusive, entrancing, and out-of-this-world sect of that cognitive experience's knowledge and wisdom. Now, to say that a specific image I saw, in the rare instances I've seen real-life images, may not have been an image, a memory of having known a physical God in the past life, I couldn't fairly negate such a possibility, the same as I couldn't definitively verify it. Such knowledge may be exclusive to our higher selves. Honor the cognitive experience. I do thoroughly believe there is God in some way, shape, or form, or in many, that is found within DMT. It just might take stretching one's understanding of God towards finding a deeper meaning of what God is to find it. Understanding that God could just be the conduit, DMT, the setting, life itself, to the connection, the divine bond between the universe and our higher and lower self that is inherently and always ours, that is more of a sometimes entertaining educational reality TV program that opens new neural pathways and unlocks new methods of thought, reasoning, and creative thinking. After all, expanding our minds to thinking outside of our boxes is exactly what God, what DMT does. Quick tangent. It's not about being right or wrong with our thoughts and beliefs. The path to enlightenment is found by thinking abstractly in a way that our status quo, which seeks to control us and our thoughts through making us fearful of thinking differently, generally fails to think. Living within the box of the status quo has greatly stunted our growth for far too long. This is why, for example, I won't and would never tell you what sort of God, particularly while on DMT, you may find, unlike most of society. Each sect or individual embodying their own uninspired version of God, received from one of many ancient texts that have been adulterated by man for millennia, and that started entirely as word of mouth, thus certainly in a completely different form after millennia of playing the game telephone. I'm simply giving to you my opinions, gleaned from my personal logic, experience, and life decisions that have subjectively led to the ever-evolving thoughts and beliefs I presently embody. Myself possessing the courage to believe something others don't when my intuitions tell me to, no matter how abstract, crazy, or out of the box it may seem, and regardless of being right or wrong about it. This unsung fear of thinking outside of what mankind often ignorantly deems as popular, thus right, is how the darkness controls us. Experience. This is the purpose of our dream, our myth. It is the purpose of the cognitive experience itself. To experience, to play, to think, to interact, to learn, to grow, to push boundaries, to break impossible records, to say yes where someone else said no, to understand no old rule or mainstream social precedent can't be wrong, corrupt, and misguided, to go where others won't, to recognize no straight line is definitively straight, to learn that 1 + 1 does not equal 2. Never stop experiencing. DMT is just another rather big part of the cognitive experience, and it can and certainly could change your world. It is about thinking outside of the box thoughts of the status quo that gives us power and reaches us closer to truth and enlightenment, unadulterated by the darknesses our steward for the last 3+ millennia control. Say yes to thinking differently than the status quo. Say yes to believing something others are afraid to. Say yes to being you rather than a mechanical slave fearfully trapped within the constructs of conformity and unanimity. And until next time.